Well, it looks like Josh Sweat is staying a Philadelphia Eagle in 2024. Does this mean Haason Reddick's about to get traded? Speaking of trades, we had one today. We'll get into it all coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, Eagles fans. I'm Louis DiBiase, co-host of the Locked On Eagles podcast, Eagles content. Also over at Bleacher Report, he's Gino Camilleri, our scouting director, my co-host, and also an analyst for Bleacher Report. On today's edition of Locked On Eagles, Josh Sweat's contract was restructured today, keeping him in Philadelphia for 2024. Is Haason Reddick about to get traded? Speaking of trades, Howie Roseman dealt for his new QB2 on Friday. Plus, we also get into another potential Eagles reunion this season. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 back in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. So yeah, kind of a surprise move. I thought, he might be on the outs. There was a report the Eagles might be looking to trade both of these players or cut one of them. And we're talking about edge rushers Haason Reddick and Josh Sweat. Well, today, according to all NFL insiders, the Eagles restructured Josh Sweat's contract, giving him $10 million guaranteed in 2024. He can make up to $13 million total. And again, Gino, of the two, if they were going to trade or cut one, I was starting to think it was going to be Josh Sweat. You could likely get more for him in a trade considering his age. There are some longevity concerns. Maybe we've discussed this in the past on the show about his knees. Reddick is a more consistent player in the sack department. So that all, for me, said Josh Sweat's probably on the outs. Now that he is staying in 2024, again, this was an extension, so Reddick could still stay. Everything's on the table. But I do personally feel like now the Eagles are going to say, we've got Bryce Huff, Josh Sweat, Nolan Smith, and Brandon Graham under contract. Let's try to move Haason Reddick and get a day 2 pick. But again, this was a restructure, not an extension, so Howie has optionality.
First off, good on Josh Sweat. I think both teams and player win in this situation.
Yeah, because he probably could have got more if he was traded or released. So sounds like he wants to be an Eagle.
On an open market, I think Josh Sweat is going to get more
at 26.
Than
he's going to get more. He's going to get more than $13 million. That's for sure.
And more than $10 million guaranteed over 1 year. That's the big kicker about it. And at the same time, you give him the guarantees, you allow him to play in a contract year.
Yeah.
If he continues to produce and let's say his knees look good and he's healthy, and you're like, okay, yeah, you go and pay him in the middle of the season, do a typical Howie Roseman middle of the year extension, and or he doesn't live up to expectations. You already have Bryce Huff under contract. You drafted Nolan Smith. Let's say he becomes the heir apparent there, and you could even invest another first, second, or no longer third round pick in another edge rusher. But at the same time, it goes to what Howie Roseman wants when it comes to roster construction. Optionality. He didn't back himself into a corner either way. He said, we got Bryce Huff. We're good right now. If we extend Josh Sweat, awesome. If we extend Haason Reddick, awesome. If we trade one, if we trade both, Howie Roseman is never going to pigeonhole himself, back himself into a corner. And now it is, Lou, can you get more potentially for Haason Reddick than you first thought? And now with a trade that happened later in the day, maybe you're trying to get another top 100 pick and you could potentially get another one with Haason Reddick and not have to wait until 2025 or 2026 potentially to get that compensatory selection if he does walk.
And look, everything is on the table though. You could say, we're going to get that third round comp pick. Let's go with a scary group of 5 in 2024 of Haason Reddick, Josh Sweat, Bryce Huff, Nolan Smith, and Brandon Graham rotating through. You get that third eventually, and boom, there you go in a contending season. That would make sense, and it would be terrifying to have that deep of an edge group. And we know the Philadelphia Eagles like to be at least 3-4 deep at that position, let alone 5 talented guys, some proven veterans, some young that are up and coming. It is an option right now that they have on the table. For me, I think if you're not going to extend both Sweat and Reddick, I would like to try to get that day 2 pick, that second or third round pick right now, which also allows Bryce Huff to get more snaps. And you just paid him $16 million a year as an ascending player. You drafted Nolan Smith in the first round last year. Do you really want to make him that fourth guy again in a rotation this year? So I think it's kind of the best of both worlds. If you move one of those players, now it would be more Reddick to Sweat, if you ask me. Get a good draft pick. And again, as you mentioned, they now don't have a third round pick. We'll get into that coming up next. And then you give an opportunity to those younger players to have a bigger role. So I think, again, both options are there. But, as a betting man, I'd say Reddick is probably moved at this point.
You have to look at the landscape of the league and how many teams could go out there and warrant getting another day one starter. He's instantly a day one starter for you. Yeah. It's not an unproven.
There's only 2 or 3 players that have had more sacks than him the last 3-4 years.
I know he's played there before. I don't know if he would accept a trade to go back, but could Carolina, with that limited amount of guys that they have after moving on from Brian Burns, potentially give up a draft pick? Or let's say Jonathan Gannon wants to reunite him in Arizona. I know our good friend Alex Clancy over at Locked On Cardinals loves that idea, but Haason Reddick, man, if you're not getting a second or a high third, let it play out like you had said. You don't just move this guy to move this guy. He could still be an impact player for you. There's no reason to think he won't be an impact player for you after what he has done the last 2 years, being arguably the best closer for the Eagles when it comes to situational pass rushing. And then you let him walk and you get the pick, or you extend him like we talked about with Josh Sweat. The optionality is there, and it's not plan A, B, and C. Everything's going to go linear. This is what's going to happen. We are in Pepe Sylvia mode over the last month trying to figure out what's going on at the edge position. And I think we've had 10 to 15 different things that we think would happen. And none of them really did happen besides Bryce Huff coming in early on.
And again, this isn't an extension for Sweat, which would to me all but guarantee Reddick's about to get traded. But the restructure does tell me you could still bring back Haason Reddick, play it by ear. As you mentioned earlier, see if Josh Sweat can bounce back from that second half collapse. The first half of the year, he was incredible. If he doesn't, you could still decide, let's trade Josh Sweat at the deadline, or let's let him walk next year and get a comp pick, and let's commit to Haason Reddick. You could play it by ear and keep both in-house, but I think it would depend on what Reddick's market is. I think Brian Burns obviously is a younger player than Haason Reddick, and he went for a second and more. But Haason Reddick, again, it's not like this guy's 35 years old. He's only 30. He's had double-digit sacks in, all 3 or 4 of the last seasons since 2020. So could he command a second rounder or a high third round pick? I still think he could. So either way, I'm just really glad, Gino, that at least one is going to be back this year. Once Jeff McClain was talking about potentially both being on the outs, even when they brought in Bryce Huff, I'm like, you don't want to lose both of those players in their prime, even after the second half collapse. They are top tier edge rushers, in my opinion. And although I believe in Nolan Smith and Bryce Huff to continue to ascend, I don't know if I would have felt comfortable having it just be those two and then Brandon Graham and potentially a rookie. So I'm glad that at least one of Sweat or Reddick are going to be back next year.
And this is a formula that worked last year for San Francisco. It worked the year before for you, where you just had a crazy deep
you want to be deep
line. You have to, and you don't want to create holes just to create holes in the National Football League when it comes to roster construction. But I get the idea of what Howie Roseman is thinking. Are we going to be able to pay 3 top-tier edge rushers?
No, but probably you can pay 2. Not. That's why I didn't want to get rid of both. Yeah. You could, and Huff's not making $20+ million, Gino. He's only making $16 annually, so you could absolutely afford to pay another one.
And I think teams would be willing to pay Haason Reddick what he wants, and I don't think he's going to get a Brian Burns type of contract to where
he'll get a 2 or 3 year deal.
Might be a little bit less than what the Giants had to give up. Or it might be a little bit more, in all honesty, because you knew that Burns was going to get this mega contract, and they missed the boat on him. I mean, Haason, he's not going to reset the market. No way. He could have did it a couple of years ago if the Eagles paid him his net worth at the time. But if they went into the season, Lou, with this group on the edge, potentially adding in a top 53 selection into this group as well, I would be super excited to see what Vic Fangio could do with all of these guys, man, because it really is, you're building a basketball team. I mean, even though Haason might be undersized. He's a completely different player from Bryce Huff, who's a completely different player from Josh Sweat, and completely different from Brandon Graham and Nolan Smith. So you really do have a nice little 5-man basketball team out there at the edge position right now.
And I do like that they're keeping Sweat, and I mentioned this on the show the other day. He is the biggest defensive end you have of the 5 guys in house right now. So although, you want to be athletic, and you could have made it work with Reddick, Huff, Nolan Smith, and Brandon Graham, it is nice to have that different type of player, especially against the run, to have some more length and size.
He's without a doubt the best run defensive end that you have. And who's to say that he doesn't become a 4-eye in a Vic Fangio scheme, that he's a bigger guy who can play inside and out. Let's say you line him up on the shoulder of the tackle or even between the guard and the tackle. See what he can do in a 2-gap run situation, and other times let him stand up, man. I think Josh Sweat standing up is one of the scariest visions in the NFL, dude. The guy is like the Predator, and I'm glad he's back, dude. He's a heat-seeking missile. I still think he has good juice in his legs, and I'm excited to see him back with this group and to see what Vic gets out of this.
Yeah. It was a crazy Friday for the Philadelphia Eagles. They also made a trade for a quarterback. I think it was a little bit of an overpay, but we will get into that move coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on a 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees do apply. And now for some legal information. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations do apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC member SIPC is a registered broker-dealer. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Guys, as you know, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today. Baseball fans, mark your calendar for March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time next week for the best MLB season preview coming exclusively to Locked On Sports Today on March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Be the first to get local insight from the MLB local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Find it on March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Howie Roseman, Trader Howie, is back on Friday, trading, for a backup quarterback. The Eagles traded the 98th overall pick in the 3rd round and 2 7th-round picks for Steelers quarterback Kenny Pickett and the 120th pick in the 4th round. And, this really shouldn't be surprising. Howie Roseman always wants to invest a lot into that QB2 spot. Marcus Mariota left for the Washington Commanders. He even overpays at times. Jalen Hurts, you can consider that 2nd-round pick an overpay, considering they had Carson Wentz under contract. I think this is one of those times where he did overpay. I don't really care about the late picks he gave up, but one thing I will say, I'm not a huge fan of that move down from 98 to 120, moving down, 32 spots from that 3rd-round pick. For Kenny Pickett, that's one thing I'm not a huge fan of, but this is what Howie does, so I wasn't super surprised either.
22 spots.
22. My math is terrible. Absolutely. Yep.
Thank God I have a calculator. But my favorite draft value chart, Brad Spielberger over the Cap, him and Jason Fitzgerald wrote it at the time. To move down from 98 to pick 120, it is only a difference of 102 points, which 102 points quite literally doesn't even fall on the scale of picks. So it equates to a late day 3 pick.
Could be the difference, though, from one of the last good linebackers left, though, in the class. That's my thing. That's a steep drop.
Having the selections this year and not giving up those later selections this year, I think is better than, because you can always recoup picks in 2025. I'm not worried about those late picks like you had said, but if you're sitting there and you want to go from 120 now to 110, you still have multiple day 3 picks that you can go ahead and give. And I want to say, on the other edge of things, folks, you don't always get a Tanner McKee. Sometimes you get a Clayton Thorson. That's how I want to put it. I mean, you are dropping 22 selections to guarantee that you get somebody who at least has played meaningful minutes in the National Football League. I know they're not great. And yes, he's probably as mid as they come. But Howie Roseman, in a market inefficiency world, saw a former first-round quarterback, and he could get that for potentially just moving down 22 selections. And I think it's more of an indictment on the lack of depth in this quarterback class when it came to an evaluation standpoint. At the same time, it's not going to preclude them from or prohibit them from drafting another quarterback if need be. And at the same time, it's Howie Roseman, folks. Like, are you really shocked that he's going to go
I'm
out
not
there and
surprised he
see
did
if
this.
a quarterback is out there and he can get one that has played in the NFL?
Gino, honestly, I thought this exact trade was going to happen, but it was going to be for a Zach Wilson, who the Eagles liked back in that 2021 class.
I'm glad it's not for Justin Fields, though, so we don't have to worry about the first time he plays bad. Like, it's clearly Jalen Hurts' job.
No, I'm very glad they did not.
Skip out on that.
As much as Justin Fields would be a much better backup option, he'd be a perfect fit schematically to be Jalen Hurts' backup. Did not want that media circus. We saw that in 2020. I do not want to risk anything with Jalen Hurts again. Don't tell me he can handle it, because we all said that about Carson Wentz too, and then look what happened. So I'm not willing to take the risk. So in that way, I am glad it wasn't Justin Fields. But I will say, I don't think Kenny Pickett is really that good of a player, and I think if it's a training camp battle in a vacuum, I don't know if Tanner McKee is a worse player. I mean, but again, I'll try to be positive here for a second. Kenny Pickett does have some things that you can like. He is mobile. He can play outside of structure. Last year, he did have some clutch gene, and that's what you needed a backup is. If the game is close, at least in the fourth quarter, he can make plays. The Steelers last year had the most comeback wins in the NFL with 8, and they had 4 fourth quarter comebacks. Pickett was a big part of those games. Like, he did step up late. The issue was, again, they had to make so many comebacks, though, because he was so terrible in the first 3 quarters. Mm-hmm. So, again, like, I'm not super mad about the move. I just wanted to keep that 98th pick, and for Pickett, I don't know if it's worth it. But, again, this is what Howie does, and, you know, like you said, it's a former first-round talent that he's taking a flyer on to be QB2. It's not like he's the starter.
It's the Tim Jernigan model. It's let's go back 20 to 30 selections. We're not giving up a ton of value. If it was Kenny Pickett for the third round pick,
that's fair. Yeah,
at least we are blowing the
levels
of all of our mics here.
Absolutely.
Like, folks, you would have to,
because if they would have took Spencer Rattler in the third round, I wouldn't have been happy with that in a vacuum, Gino. And so I would rather have a Rattler than a Pickett, though. Yeah. So yeah, I agree. At least they did recoup that fourth back.
And that's what you're going to have to look at is acquiring a surefire middle to higher level backup quarterback worth 22 spots. That's how I'm going to keep looking at it.
I mean, he probably is just as good as Mariota, I would say. So in that way, it's not like you downgraded.
And you still have him on his rookie contract. Yes, it is a little bit more than you would have expected, but at the same time, this could be the Gardner Minshew model where in a couple years, you either look to trade him to potentially be a starter. Look, Gardner's now competing for 2 straight starting jobs, or he walks and all of a sudden you have another comp pick that you could go and use to potentially go and get another backup quarterback. And out of all the moves that Howie Roseman has made, I think this one is definitely looked at through the microscope the most because it is at the worst one position. For sure. And it definitely is one where you're scratching your head for sure when it comes to play and what you have seen out of him. And I would also like my quarterback to have bigger hands than me, who's 5'8", and I'm pretty sure I have 8 5/8 hands, and he's relatively close to that.
Yeah, so the other thing I heard about this story, apparently Mike Tomlin told Kenny Pickett he'd have a chance to compete for the starting job. When Russell Wilson came in, Tomlin did go to Pickett and tell him that Wilson would be the starter pretty much. He would get the majority of the first-team reps. Pickett didn't like that, requested a trade, and here we are. So for everybody that would just talk trash about Carson Wentz back in 2020, this is every quarterback, guys. They do not, like, it's a unique situation at this position, and it's exactly why I wouldn't have wanted to trade for Justin Fields. So Pickett wanted out. And
that's not Russell Wilson's PR department trying to cover up his insecurities that he showed here in Denver.
Could, but again, all quarterbacks are insecure. I mean, I've been watching the Patriots dynasty one, and Tom Brady was insecure about Matt Castle, for Christ's sake. Like, that is this position.
It does happen. But I think Jalen Hurts can be very secure in his job. And at the end of the day, we're not a team that's having Sam Darnold potentially compete for a starting job in Minnesota. And this is the 12th move now that we have had in free agency. And we talked about a good one right before this and you keeping Josh Sweat in house. And folks, in a couple of weeks, we're going to have a couple draft picks that are going to add to this roster. We're going to be saying, oh, Kenny Pickett, who? So just we need to just chill a little bit. And best case scenario is this guy doesn't touch the field at all, and Jalen Hurts is completely healthy for 20 games.
He was an Eagles fan too growing up. He actually, there was a picture going around on Twitter. He was wearing a Carson Wentz jersey, which makes me feel old because he grew up as a Carson Wentz fan. He
did look young in that Carson Wentz.
Yeah, that's scary. That
7 years ago.
Was he in high school rocking a Carson Wentz jersey? That's pretty terrifying. But Kenny Pickett traded to the Eagles. Again, the trade details: the Eagles send the 98th overall pick in the 3rd round and 2 7ths. They get back 120 in the 4th. And Kenny Pickett. Coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles, we got some more reunion talk. A left tackle was just released by the Tennessee Titans that I think the Eagles could consider trading back for, or I should say signing. We'll get into that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
As we finish up this Friday edition of LOE, we have a message from our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, the conference tournaments are going on, so say goodbye to busted brackets before March Madness kicks off. FanDuel lets you bet on every single game of not just the conference tournament, but the CBI, the NIT, and the big one, the NCAA tournament. Whether you want to bet on the number 1 seed, a road dog, always bet on the 12s over 5. Make sure you go to America's number 1 sportsbook. Today, new customers, if you win on a $5 bet, you get $200 back in bonus bets. What's better than getting 40 times your money by a single Abraham Lincoln winning bet? Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on any college hoops until they cut down the nets. We thank FanDuel for being the official sportsbook of LOE and the entire Locked On Podcast Network.
All right, Gino, so the Philadelphia Eagles have been very busy in free agency. They also made a trade today for Kenny Pickett from the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't think the moves are going to stop, though. There's a guy that just got released today by the Tennessee Titans that Eagles fans are very familiar with. The Eagles traded up in the 2019 NFL Draft for this guy. It was our first live draft show together, actually, was this pick. It's Andre Dillard, who the Titans signed to a pretty sizable contract to be their starting left tackle. Did not work out. But, I think honestly, again, for what the Eagles need as a, swing tackle guard backup, I don't mind bringing Andre Dillard back. Again, yes, did he become the left tackle of the future to replace Jason Peters? No. Was he that guy for the Tennessee Titans? No. Should he be a swing tackle that plays right and left like Halapoulivaati Vaitai? No. But I do think if you're looking just for a straight-up backup left tackle to Jordan Mailata and continue to build your line depth, which you need at tackle right now with Jack Driscoll being a free agent, I don't mind that potential reunion.
Sua Opeta also signed with the Buccaneers today,
right.
So there goes another depth.
So you've got Matt Hennessy and not a whole lot on that depth.
You got a lot of, I think Fred Jackson is in that equation.
Yeah, Fred Jackson too.
You don't have much outside of that, and it's another Bill Belichickian move by Howie Roseman, go overpay for Andre Dillard, Tennessee, and we'll potentially take him back. And I don't think
is that going to start happening where Eagles just get paid elsewhere and then they stink and just come back on a team-friendly deal?
I want to talk about Chauncey before we wrap up the show too. I think he had some good things to say, but the Andre Dillard move in a bubble, I think it makes so much sense because one, the familiarity with Jeff Stoutland. If Jeff Stoutland says he likes short play, he's not just talking out of both sides of his mouth. He is from New Jersey. You know this guy. He isn't just going to blow smoke up your rear end. He liked Andre Dillard in his ability to overcome his early year woes, put on some weight, become a left guard, left tackle swing type of player for you, which this Eagles team could use. And what are you going to bring him back for? A bag of bones because he's already getting money from Tennessee right now. They take that $10 million cap hit. And I think it makes sense just to have somebody that is a known commodity at that position, because the worst thing you can do is go into this season and have a rookie left tackle that if Jordan Mailata went down, that would be the guy that you had to move there. And
that's kind of what you're looking at right now, Gino. They're one tackle injury away from kind of being in trouble. And we've seen over the last few years, especially at the right side, when Lane Johnson went down, this team looked vastly different, as they always do. If Jordan Mailata goes down, it can be the same thing on the left-hand side. So I think Andre Dillard on a cheap deal actually makes a lot of sense. And when you look at a few years ago when he was just the primary left tackle backup and they weren't trying to switch things up, he actually was pretty solid in 2021.
I said Fred Jackson because
Fred Johnson, right?
Fred Johnson, yeah. He's also your backup swing left tackle there too. But you can't be in a situation where you are one snap away from having a rookie protect your quarterback's blind side. That should be
especially when you're so young to begin with, Gino, like Tyler Steen, Cam Jurgens, you're already pretty young inside.
And Jordan Mailata, respectively, has been relatively healthy in his career. And Lane Johnson, he's been banged up.
But what if Lane gets hurt and you want Mailata to swing over to the right side? Like they've done that before. Like that's another reason you want that primary left tackle backup.
I just think signing known offensive line talent is good. And Matt Hennessy, I think, is a very good backup guard center for you. I think you've solidified that position now with Sue Opeta out, but you have to fill that LaRaven Clark type of role that the Eagles have quite literally signed LaRaven Clark like during training camp every single year to go and fill that role.
And again, they are going to draft a tackle early. I would almost guarantee one of those top picks will be for that position. But having Andre Dillard there as this year's version of, like a Dennis Kelly, only much better, I'm definitely in on that reunion. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, before we go, he did meet with the media today. Some cool news. He's going to be wearing number 8. So he is not going back to number 23. He's going to wear 8 in honor of Kobe Bryant. Love that move for the aesthetic, but I thought he did say some things today that showed some maturity. Like they asked him what was different this time around, and he talked about he had to accept some things that he didn't last year, and maybe that was like taking a cheaper deal, not trying to break the market. He did show some maturity, which I liked.
The Chauncey Gardner-Johnson that we saw today was not the Chauncey Gardner-Johnson we saw a year ago. Yeah. That was a matured individual from what I heard, and we'll see actions speak.
Humbled, it feels like, for sure.
Yeah, he said that injury, he really got to take a step back, and he had a very good quote, and he realized it's like, for once I realized it wasn't just about me. I realized it was about the team. And he said, like, what somebody asked him what was different in this go around in free agency. He's like, I wasn't in my feels. And I'm like, that's a matured individual.
I will give him some props, though. I will defend him a little bit. Like last year, he was coming off an incredible season.
Yeah, he has the right to.
He has the right to go get his bag and not try to be lowballed. Like not every player should be okay with Howie Roseman. Like Howie Roseman is right for his approach the majority of the time, but that doesn't mean players have to be okay with that.
Totally. And I think Chauncey's perspective was, hey, maybe it was smarter for me to end up staying here. Maybe if it did cost a little bit less, but at the same time, he went out there and gained perspective, man. Like sometimes you have to, I love referencing that Matthew McConaughey, just the one where he's like picking boogers in that commercial. What is it? The Cadillac or Buick where he's like, you got to go back to go forward. Like they meme that all the time. And it's so true. Like maybe he had to take a step back to realize that Philadelphia was the place to be. And I'm glad he's back because that type of leadership, that is going to go such a long way because that's what has always been great about Philadelphia is the team over the eye any day of the week. That's why seeing stuff like the Darius Slay stuff last year, you're like, this isn't Philadelphia, man. Like we don't need to be talking about ourselves here. It's like, it's a whole. And to hear CGJ, who I think on the way out, a lot of people said a lot of things about him that might have been unfair, and good on him, man, for being 26 years old and looking at life way better than a lot of people who are twice or 3 times his age do. So I'm glad to see him, and I love that 8 look, man. I think that's going to be
Bryce Huff's wearing number 0 too. The defense, the numbers wise,
back.
I was a little nervous that Bryce Huff was going to be rocking the Nate Geary 47. Really glad, like to go from 47 to 0. That might be the best aesthetic improvement the Eagles have ever seen.
Oh yeah, there's quite literally
47 to 0. Like that's from 0 to 100.
That's like the Premier League Academy players have to wear like 86, and then they go to the first team and they get like 9 or 10, and that's finally what it's like. And I think they're building something good here, Lou. I think every day over the past couple days in free agency, they have gotten better. And
it was a hell of a week. I think they crushed it. I think they nailed it. On paper, of course, but
if you don't agree with the moves, that's what it's about. We can agree to disagree on everything, right? But at the end of the day, if you look at the top of these moves as opposed to where they were a year ago, I think this Philadelphia Eagles team is on a very good track to being back where we want them to be, and that is competing.
I'm excited for Monday. We got Mock Draft Monday returning after this free agent frenzy of these past 5 days. So what do the Eagles do now in the NFL Draft? We'll shift focus next Monday right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off. As always, thank you for downloading, thank you for watching and listening, and let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.